Bitcoin crashed today to about $86,000, give or take. And I want to just kind of give you guys a kind of update slash, I guess, some lessons that I've learned over like the last, close to 8 or 9 years that I've been basically investing in crypto, a little bit longer for just general markets. And obviously when it comes to Bitcoin, I've always maintained a stance that I want to accumulate Bitcoin long term. I do think that short term things do look bearish. I still remain optimistic as long as we kind of hold above like the $75,000 range. Now, that's been the case so far, but obviously we have, a lot of selling kind of going on. We kind of notice this like as soon as the market kind of opens up. Seemingly what happens is we end up like pumping like overnight, usually on like the Sundays. But now even like in the weekdays, right? Like we notice like around like 3 or 4 in the morning, the market starts to kind of go up. And as soon as the market opens, we get this massive sell-off. So that kind of tells me that either there's just manipulation going on or we have like a large marginal seller and just not enough like marginal buyers to basically be absorbing the sell pressure, right? Now, this can be looked at as, a number of ways, but the long and short of it is things do look bearish. And if you're somebody that's perhaps a longer term like time horizon person, you're not really like worried about this, right? Like I think that we can all agree, if you're investing in Bitcoin, then you've already kind of bought into the future. Maybe this is your first cycle, so this is a lot of volatility for you. For those of us that have been around for multiple 4-year cycles, this is my third now. It's not uncommon to see such boring price action and just like very underwhelming price action, in my opinion. Like I think this is the longest we've been in extreme fear in terms of Bitcoin. I think this is like the longest streak. And it's funny because we're like 30% off the highs, which is pretty abysmal when you compare it to, me watching it drop. Like it literally dropped like 40% in a day at one point. Could get a lot worse, but again, this is why I kind of tell you guys, you always need to have some sort of long-term investing strategy, because one of the biggest lessons that I learned is when I first started investing, I was just so anxious to get into the asset. So I just threw all my money in right away. And obviously that was probably around like a cycle top, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back and double check, but that's usually how it always happens, right? Like you see people making money, you FOMO into the market, you want as much exposure as possible, and then you get humbled by the market, right? And then usually like all the emotions set in and you start, maybe panic selling, or you just kind of, you don't really know what you're doing. And so I think over time, the one thing that I've always refined is being very patient when it comes to just accumulation, because you always have to look at your dollars as like soldiers, is kind of like what I say. And I say I'm sending them off to battle to go like make me more money. And so you never want to buy whenever things are just going crazy and there's like a lot of FOMO. You always want to, what I call like multiply your return. Like it's just, so for example, let's say that Bitcoin is $100,000 and you have $10,000 to buy, right? You don't want to throw all that money in, right? Because it can obviously go up or down. Usually what happens is whenever people have like the FOMO to start buying, it's usually a good time to take a step back, because the market's probably going to humble you and go down. And so the cheaper the asset becomes, meaning that the price is going to sell off and go down, the more kind of returns you can kind of expect, longer term, right? And you always want to be greedy in that sense, because the overall kind of mindset that you should have with investing is it should be boring and it should be, compounding over time. You don't really want to look at these moves on a week to week, day to day, month to month. You kind of want to look at this as like a multi-year sort of time horizon, right? Now, obviously there's short-term speculative plays that you can get into whenever the markets are very hot. And that's what's basically what we call like momentum trading. When things get really, really bullish, people tend to go out of Bitcoin. That's why you see these altcoin seasons, which hasn't really been the case lately, but that's kind of how that happens, right? And so you always want to protect your purchasing power, and you're not going to do that if you're just like obviously just throwing all your money in, right? And so you almost want the price to go down, assuming that you're trying to have a longer term time horizon. And I always remember this because, I remember like last cycle, a lot of my family members and friends got into the market, and I was just so like kind of bitter because I saw Bitcoin and Ethereum making all-time highs, Solana making all-time highs. And I was kind of offloading some of my crypto at that point, and I just saw everybody trying to FOMO into the market. And I was so mad because, not mad, but just like frustrated because I was selling and I just wasn't buying, because it was frustrating that like my cost basis was so much lower. I didn't want to be buying at these prices because, the risk to reward is very real. And I think people if you're not new to crypto, if you are new to crypto, then people don't know what it feels like when you buy, like, for example, if you buy Solana like $5, $10, and it goes up to like 300, there's a lot of people that usually catch Solana, like for example, like they're buying like $150, $200. And obviously it went up to like $300 at some point, right? But that's nothing compared to the massive returns that you see, or even like with Bitcoin, right? It went from like $15,000 to about $100,000. So it really pays to have patience, because there's always going to be dips. There's always going to be something that happens. There's always some sort of narrative as to why the price is going down, why the sky's falling down. And that's how markets work. They work for basically multiple reasons, right? But the main one is they want to take the most amount of money from the most amount of people that are typically financially illiterate and impatient. They also, prey on like your psychology. So they want to make you FOMO in at the tops, so that they have sell pressure to basically offload their kind of holdings or whatever, and then they just reaccumulate. That's why they have like all these like Wyckoff theories and all this kind of stuff. Obviously technical analysis does work to an extent, because it's basically like human psychology is what the charts really are. But they're also used to manipulate people into different biases. And when you have something like crypto and Bitcoin that's such a small market cap compared to everything else, it's pretty easy to paint these charts and just manipulate them, especially these altcoins, right? So I don't really care too much about technical analysis. That's why it's never really a good idea to be on the crypto Twitter 24/7, because there's always going to be an echo chamber of like negative people and positive people. And you always just want to stick to what your belief is, what your strategy is, because nobody's going to kind of hold your hand and like live your journey for you. And, you just need to kind of refine that over time. And so, again, I can give you a million reasons as to why Bitcoin's selling off. Like the narrative this week is Japanese yen carry trade and Oracle, AI stocks, the AI bubbles bursting, money printing, all this kind of like, just all this, like, you take your pick, right? Like there's just so many different narratives, and it's frankly funny and exhausting, because people just like live off of these like narratives, and it's like, oh, this is why it's going down. It's like, no, the price is going down because like the bigger whales like want to move this, like they know what's going on. Like, sure, there are other stuff, kind of happening behind closed doors, but it doesn't change the fact, or I can't give financial advice, but, my base case is that Bitcoin does hit over $1 million at some point. And so I'm looking at this like, why aren't I buying at $85,000? Why aren't I buying if it goes down to 80 or 70 or 60, whatever? Because it's going to give me more returns over time. I don't want to be buying if it's above $100,000. And if you think I'm thinking like this, what do you think, billionaires and multi-trillion dollar, fund managers and all this kind of stuff, what do you think they're thinking? Like, they know that blockchain is the future. That's why all these like regulations are coming out. They want to tokenize everything, institutionalize everything, and control it. So I'm not, that's just kind of like, it's always been my base case. And so, again, I think that they're just way too short-sighted, and I think a lot of people get in for the wrong reasons. I think that most people, they don't really have an outside source of income, and so what they do is they come in thinking that they're going to turn a little bit of money into a lot of money, and they're very impatient. And so what happens is, when you have like that kind of sort of mindset, when it's like, I have to have this now, and if it's not happening, then you kind of like emotionally sabotage yourself, and you just like sell out. Things go down 30-40%. I know people that have done this in the past. Like, I have friends personally that, they buy when everything's really, really hot. It goes down like 30%, goes sideways for a few months, and they're like, hey man, I'm out, And so they just lost 30% of their money, but then like months later, if we're at all-time highs, they buy back in. And that's usually like what most people do, and that's why most people don't really make money. That's why that's what we call the 1%, right? Because you're able to withstand more than the average person, and you just have more of discipline, right? That's really what it is. And another thing, I think that there's so many ways to now make money, especially with like AI coming out, artificial intelligence. There's so many different kind of business ventures. If you guys want me to make a video specifically kind of covering some of those, just drop that in the comments. I try to be like primarily like investing crypto mindset, but over the years, I've learned various different ways to kind of generate an income. And whenever you don't want to spread yourself too thin, but you want to do something that's just kind of like a sure way that you're good at making money. Doesn't necessarily even have to be your passion. And then you can use that to then fuel your passion, right? And just kind of multiply your money. Because if you're like trying to buy crypto with debt or taking on loans or whatever, and then like you're trying to make more money in crypto, and then you're like more over leveraging, that's just a recipe for disaster, especially with like October 10th. If that hasn't taught you anything, then I don't know what to tell you. I know people that have built their net worth to tens of millions of dollars over the years, and they literally lost everything because they were cross-margin trading. They kept all their money on exchanges, and they just did stuff that they thought was very low risk. But when you have situations like that, it doesn't even, like, you could be the best trader ever, but if the system breaks and like oracles break and all that kind of stuff, you're kind of screwed. And I really feel for people like that because I cannot imagine, I lost a little bit of money because I was in some trades, and like honestly, I was at the vet with my dog. He's fine, but I just didn't have access to like any of nothing, right? So it was just, what do you do in that scenario? And, a lot of people got caught off guard. And I think that's another reason why, crypto Twitter and people are just so bitter and miserable right now. So it's just, you never want to like kind of dwell and worry about what everybody else is saying. Like obviously you can use, the main narratives or like news that's being released, use that as a sort of like temperature gauge. But if history's taught us anything, it's always kind of like an ideal situation to take the contrarian trade. Whenever everyone was thinking we're going to go to all-time highs, that's basically where we started dropping, right? It doesn't matter the reason, it's just kind of like how the cycles work. And whenever, the FTX collapsed, Luna, Three Arrows Capital, you had everyone like the SEC going after everybody, and Bitcoin was like $15,000, and people were saying, oh, it's going to go to like 10. What happened? We massively rallied back to like $25,000 pretty quick, and then it was not long after that we went to all-time highs. And that was even in like unfavorable like administrations and trends and all that kind of stuff. So there's no telling what's actually going to happen, but I think the destination is pretty laid out in terms of just like the overall landscape of the countries, the economy, the fiat system in general, right? Because all these countries, they basically need to print us out of this sort of pain that we're going through. Obviously the Bank of Japan is going to hike their interest rates, but it's like everyone's talking about this at this point. I think the massive like unwind kind of started happening back in like, I think like around like last April-ish was like one of the biggest scares. And then obviously like around October, there was like some announcements about that. I'm not saying it's not completely priced in or it is or whatever, but it's exhausting. It's not even worth wasting time. If you're somebody that's like really risk averse, then maybe consider de-risking a little bit. Maybe have something on the side. You always want to have a cash pile so that you can buy back in, or at the very least, like if you're in like leverage positions and stuff, which I never advocate for, try to like get out of them, or do something to where you're going to sleep well at night, because there's no cost that's worth like your peace of mind when it comes to investing. Investing should be boring. It should be something that just helps you over time, not just something that consumes you and stops you from living your everyday life. Because I see a lot of that happening with traders and just people that I know. They get so consumed into, it doesn't even have to be investing. It can be like in any kind of like work that they do. They kind of neglect like either their health, their family, their, relationships. Like there's just a lot of, whatever, right? Like I'm just trying to say, like, you want to have a very well-rounded, fulfilling life. And it's never a good idea to do something that's going to constantly stress you out. So you need to prioritize that first, and then just have a game plan and set yourself up for success in the long term versus the short term. So with that being said, let me know how you like this kind of like mindset sort of content. I can continue to make more. I don't really want to, always cover like what's going on, like price action, like 2 times a day. Like I'm happy to just kind of like yap with you guys a little bit, excuse me, and just kind of give you some like, little nuggets that, kind of helped me, and just lessons that I've learned over time, because I've lost a lot of money over the years, and I've kind of fine-tuned my own strategies to where, I'm a lot better off. I'm a lot more peaceful. I prioritize my fitness. Those that follow the channel, you guys know this. Prioritize my relationships. I always make time on the weekends, especially for like family, girlfriend, whatever. And that's the way that life should be. I think that people invest to basically get their time back and be able to share their world with people. So again, with that being said, make sure you subscribe, turn on your bell notifications. I will see you guys soon. Bye.